The key piece to all of this is farmers first, right? If we don't protect our farmers and secure a solid pathway for them, then we don't have a crop to enter into the supply chain. We don't have a value chain. And so while there are a lot of issues that we're dealing with processing and with end products, with FDA, is that we have to be very cognizant about what is happening in the field for the farmers.
That's Courtney Moran, Chief Legislative Strategist for Agricultural Hemp Solutions, a group that's lobbying Congress to secure a science-based legal hemp concentration limit of 1% THC in the definition of hemp. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today I'll talk to Courtney Moran about her lobbying efforts with Agricultural Hemp Solutions, specifically the Crossroads campaign, which aims to reduce the legal burdens and financial hardships on farmers and domestic hemp agribusinesses by addressing the universal concerns with the USDA interim final rule. Moran was part of the team that worked with Senator Mitch McConnell to draft the original hemp language in the 2018 Farm Bill. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Today's show is sponsored by King's Agri-Seeds. King's Agri-Seeds 2021 hemp lineup includes two new F1 autoflower hybrids, Auto CBD Alpha Explorer and Alpha Nebula, which were both screened at King's Research Farm in Christiana, Pennsylvania. You can earn free seeds by committing early on these new hybrids. First deadline is December 18th. Terms and conditions apply. Call 717-687-6224 or go to kingsagriseeds.com for more information. Courtney Moran, Chief Legislative Strategist for Agricultural Hemp Solutions. Welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm great, Eric. Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. Could you give us a brief introduction?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Courtney Moran. I am the Chief Legislative Strategist for Agricultural Hemp Solutions. I'm also the founding principal and attorney for EarthLaw LLC, and I'm also the president and lobbyist for the Oregon Industrial Hemp Farmers Association. I've been in the hemp industry for almost 10 years, or really just advocating for cannabis law reform for the last 10 years. And, it started for me with reading the book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes by Jack Herer. And I really just couldn't believe what I was reading. This plant could do so many amazing things and yet was an illegal substance. I couldn't believe it. And, went to law school and decided that we needed to change the laws, and that's what we've done.
Good, yeah. So I invited you on the show to talk specifically about, your work in advocating for the raise in the THC limit. And, in doing some research on the work you're doing, I realized how influential you've been in the industry and how much work you've done. And so I just want to thank you because you've done a whole lot of amazing things, and it's an honor to have you on our show.
You're welcome, and thank you. It's really been an honor to work on these issues and to help farmers and to educate our policymakers and really see the impact that we can have in setting our policy.
Well, let's first talk about the 0.3% THC rule and why you think it should be raised to 1%. Science
is the easy answer. The 0.3 has been around for too long, and we all know that it's based on an arbitrary standard. When we're setting up a framework for an industry, do we want that to be based on arbitrary standards that are coming out of fear, or do we want it to be science-based and evidence-based? And for me, it's really that simple. And of course, on the ground, it has a much bigger impact for the farmers, which is what we've been seeing and what the big concern is right now.
Right. I talk to farmers all the time, and they're always bumping up against that 0.3% rule. And it creates so much risk, both financial and even, criminal risk for farmers. Are lawmakers aware of how big of a problem it is for farmers?
Some lawmakers are. I don't think all of them really understand the nuances of what happens in the field or understand the history of our genetics and where they're coming from, how they've been bred, what happens in the field, the variances that can happen, the day of sampling, how a sample is taken, all that are leading up to this crucial moment of, is this crop that I've grown and spent all of this time and money and invested in going to be legal that I can actually get it into the supply chain, or is it illegal and I may have to destroy it and potentially have criminal prosecution or, just a criminal penalty because of that. And so I think some that have been very focused and supportive of the hemp industry are aware. I think others are still trying to get over this reefer madness fear that has been driving policy for decades, and that's what we have to overcome.
So how do you do that?
Education. We do that by being honest and being forthcoming with our regulators and helping them understand what the science is, what the history of the 0.3 is, where it came from, why it's here, but also what's really happening on the ground and what the benefit can be to our farmers and to our global economy.
Okay, can you talk about specifically the work you're doing with Agricultural Hemp Solutions? Or maybe first tell me what that organization is.
Sure, thank you. Agricultural Hemp Solutions is a government relations firm that is focused on passing pro-hemp legislation, not only on the state, but also the federal level, and working with departments of agriculture, again, both the State Department of Agriculture or the federal USDA, in implementing comprehensive hemp programs that actually make sense for the farmers in their field. But we also work on policy for processors and anyone throughout the supply chain.
And so it's my understanding that you were on the team working with Senators Wyden and McConnell when they actually drafted the hemp language in the 2018 Farm Bill. Was there discussion at the time about how restrictive the definition of hemp was at 3%?
Absolutely. There was a lot of conversation about that. When we were working on the 2018 Farm Bill, it's important to understand that this was not the first time that a federal farm bill had been, a hemp farming act had been introduced in Congress. Senator Wyden had actually introduced hemp farming acts 4 times before. So this was the 5th time on the Senate side that a hemp farming act had been introduced. But this was the first time that on the Senate side that a hemp farming act actually really set up a full regulatory program. And so we were trying to negotiate with as many different agencies and different offices as possible to set up as robust of a framework as we could, but also trying to alleviate the issues that we had learned under the 2014 Farm Bill and the pilot programs that had developed. And so some of the things that we had done, you'll notice that we moved away from a definition of industrial hemp to hemp in the 2018 Farm Bill, and that was to really get DEA to move away from the idea that industrial hemp only meant for industrial purposes like grain and fiber production, but that we meant all types of production, including cannabinoids. So when we started talking about the THC percentage, we had already seen that there were some concerns with the 0.3 language. I have known for a very long time about, where the 0.3 came from Dr. Ernest Small's paper, and that even in his own paper, he references that it's an arbitrary, standard. And so the fact that that has been carried through in regulations just didn't make sense. If we had the opportunity, we were actually crafting, a full commercial legalization bill and program. And so we had talked about it a lot, and through educating a lot of different members of Congress, we were able to get them to come around and come to the table. Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley out of Oregon have, been very understanding and very knowledgeable on the topic, and they've been supportive from the beginning. Really, the entire Oregon congressional delegation has been amazing on all of these issues. We had Rand Paul come around, we had Congressman Comer out of Kentucky come around and be always supportive, but we could not get Senator McConnell's office to come around. And a lot of that was because of the fear of cannabis. Senator McConnell is very openly against marijuana legalization. And because of concerns with marijuana and, higher THC concentrations, his office was not willing to go to the 1% at that time.
Okay. Where do you think he is on that now?
Well, I know that there has been a lot of advocacy within the state of Kentucky itself. A lot of farmers have been communicating with their local officials and their state officials. And so hopefully he's understanding and more willing to come around.
Can you describe like what is the work you're doing like? Like you're calling people, you're visiting politicians, or like what are you doing to get to these people to educate them?
Yes, a lot of meetings, phone calls, along those lines. Over the past several years, through my own advocacy, not only working with my state legislature, but doing outreach with the Oregon congressional delegation, I've built a lot of different relationships. And, when I was working on the language for the 2018 Farm Bill, I did that all just because I really care about this plant and wanted to see it legal. I was not getting paid for any of that. I did it just to do it. But I flew out to DC and I would make the rounds around Congress. I, just set up meetings with a lot of different legislators, run back and forth between the House and the Senate, and, meet with as many folks that I could. And, of course, target who you're meeting with, the committee chairs and, people in positions of power, and making sure that those that actually, have major influence are understanding the topic. And what's been really interesting about the work that I have done is that in many offices, not only, on a state level, but on a federal level, many of them had never had anyone talk to them about hemp before. And even some of the offices that had been working on marijuana policy had never had folks talk to them about hemp issues before. And so just coming in their office, letting them know, like, hey, this is an issue. We have an opportunity for farmers. Some of them got on board right away. Some of them couldn't believe that it was even an issue that had to be addressed. And others could not believe I had the audacity to say the word hemp in their office. Or would say to me, well, we're not talking, or, we're not supportive of marijuana. We're not going to have a conversation about marijuana. And I'm like, great, that's not what I'm here to talk about either. We're talking about hemp.
That must have been very frustrating.
Frustrating, but enlightening about where folks were at. I have been doing this for about a decade now, and I interned for National Normal when I was in law school. And so I learned firsthand right then, the challenges that we were going to have to overcome. And I always think it provides an opportunity, right? If someone doesn't know, then that's our opportunity to educate them and to give them an opportunity to provide benefits and value back to their own constituents.
Is there something I'm missing about THC? Like, why does it scare people so much? Like, or is that just like borrowed fear, that was generated in the reefer madness? Or is there something that like people in power don't want the people to have it? Or like, where do you think this is coming from?
I think it's historical fear that, if we look at the age demographic of who a lot of our regulators are, they come from an era of the drug war. And I think this has just been ingrained in a lot of folks. I grew up in the DARE program. I was taught how awful cannabis was and all the horrible things it could do. And then I learned that a lot of that was not true. And, I think that's just where it comes from. There's a lot of fear out there. And, if folks have been on their high horse anti-cannabis their whole lives, then, it's harder for them to come around. Mm. And especially if they have constituents that voted to keep them in office because they share those same values. Some legislators go out and they campaign on their pro-cannabis platform. And others campaign on an anti-cannabis platform. It's not like their sole issue if they're anti-cannabis, but that, a lot of them are thinking about their voters.
Right. So, it seems like we're on this like cusp of great big cannabis reform in the United States. What would like a federal legalization or rescheduling of the cannabis plant, like, how would that affect the hemp industry?
That's a great question, Eric. And as you know, every lawyer would answer, it depends. And I say it depends because it will be dependent upon what that language looks like. If legislation for national legalization is set up in a way that a lot of the state programs have been set up, where hemp is run by the Department of Agriculture, medical marijuana is regulated by a health authority type agency, recreational marijuana is regulated by a liquor type control agency or something of the like, that it will continue to be these fragmented and separately regulated programs. And I think probably initially it's going to be like that, but ideally long term, once we have consensus and legalization of the plant, that we won't be so concerned about what THC the plant has in the ground, and we'll really be more concerned about what is that plant being grown for, how is it going to be processed, how is it going to be sold, where is it going to be sold, and who is it going to be sold to, and really be more focused on the end product and not the plant. And so ideally, we would have all cultivation regulated by the Department of Agriculture, and then have, processing and end products regulated by the entities that regulate those type of like products.
Do you have a vision for the U.S. hemp industry, like how the industry can ramp up production and demand at the same time? Because it seems like everyone agrees that, yes, we could be growing lots and lots of hemp, and it seems like there's businesses that could use a lot of hemp, and there's that bottleneck in the processor level. But like, what's your vision long term for the industry? And I don't mean like cannabinoid stuff. I mean like fiber and grain and like big stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the dream, right? Is to replace and use hemp in rotation with other crops and start to see it in more of our traditional products, move away from fossil fuels, move away from non-sustainable materials, move away from, GMOs, things like that. I mean, I would like to see hemp at its full potential, where we're cleaning up toxins in soil, making sustainable products that are healthy for us and healthy for the earth.
Right. It's like if we could go from a petroleum-based manufacturing to plant-based. It seems like
exactly
just that simple change. And maybe that's a mindset, but it's also, I don't know, it could have just lasting beneficial repercussions.
Oh, it would have amazing positive impacts on, people and planet. But we also have to think about other interests that are out there, that have been out there, what the fossil fuel industry has been advocating for and has been doing all of these years. And that's not going away, right, until the supply is gone. And so we have to be very cognizant about how do we work together? How do we start to incorporate hemp and other biomaterials into the materials and the products that we're making? And, I think a lot of the issue is, and we have not had the infrastructure. Right. And so farmers had been reluctant to start growing fiber. I think, less reluctant to grow grain, but, reluctant to grow fiber because there wasn't the processing capabilities. But now we're starting to see a lot more expansion and development of not only the grain sector, but also on the fiber sector. And we are starting to see more farmers growing that. And once we have more acreage, I think the opportunities are, they're almost limitless. If we think about all the different products that can be made, it's incredible, right? Not only our clothing or our paper, but our plastics, our vehicles, maybe eventually our actual fuel, right? And so I have a lot of hopes and dreams for this industry, and I really think we're just at the very beginning, right? We're still just trying to figure this out. We've been lawfully growing for 6.5 years in this country. We still haven't even fully implemented the 2018 Farm Bill and our commercial program. And so we're at the very, very nascent stages of this industry, and we just have incredible opportunity. But with that opportunity, we need to be very cognizant on what do our regulations look like? what is the regulatory framework that we're operating under, and is that a framework that actually is going to allow us to thrive and get to these amazing opportunities that we see?
Right.
Or are we constraining the industry and our farmers because of fear-based regulation rather than science-based or risk-based regulation?
Do you have any sense if some of those old, like 20th century industries, the oil industry, are they actively working against the hemp industry at all?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I mean, we really haven't seen any anti-hemp lobbying. There's been pushback from pharmaceutical industries and pharmaceutical companies trying to protect the work that they have done and trying to ensure that the existing regulatory pathways for drug approvals, are followed. But otherwise, no, we haven't seen that.
What can farmers or processors or just like regular citizens do to help move the THC discussion from 0.3 to 1%? Like, how can we get to THC irrelevancy at the farmer level?
Number one, being good actors, and working within your programs, working with your departments of agriculture, communicating with law enforcement, and working with not only your state regulators and legislators, but also your federal members of Congress. And so by communicating with them about what's really happening on the ground and making them understand that, I'm just a small family farmer, or I'm just a farmer trying to grow a crop and create opportunities for myself and to feed my family. And these regulations are impeding that ability because of an arbitrary threshold that really doesn't make sense. And I think it's really through that open and honest communication with our regulators and our legislators that things are going to change, and that's how they have changed. We have gone from being just a lot of, hemp advocates, hempsters out here trying to share the word about this amazing plant before it was even being grown, to, having dedicated professionals working on every aspect of the value chain. And that's happened because we have been able to be forthcoming about what we're trying to do, trying to create opportunities. And I think we have like an amazing opportunity right now to continue that conversation. And through the pilot programs, there was a lot of leeway in the states of what they could do. The federal framework was very broad. As long as you set up a regulatory framework with your state Department of Agriculture in a state that had already legalized hemp, you basically had a pilot program. And so states were, what I like to call the playgrounds for this. And they were able to, pass different legislation, develop different rules, see what was working in the fields for their farmers, their processors, their, domestic state industry. And we've seen a lot of different programs develop. And some have done really amazing things, and some have been more restrictive. But with the new federal regulations and the new 2018 Farm Bill and the interim final rule, there's more restrictive regulations. And so I would like to see both USDA and members of Congress really look back to what the experienced states have done and how they have been able to develop their programs and advance those programs.
It seems like there's something happening now where maybe the USDA is being asked to put the IFR on hold until maybe the next Farm Bill, letting the 2014 rules stand a little bit longer. Do I have that right?
Not exactly.
Okay.
So
Can you explain that?
Okay, so what's happened is that in the 2018 Farm Bill, we provided for a transition between the 2014 pilot programs and the 2018 Farm Bill commercial programs. And so when USDA issued their plan on October 31st of 2019, it set in play this 1-year transition period. But the rules that came out from USDA were much more restrictive than we had anticipated. And as clearly stated from Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley in multiple letters sent to them, that many of the provisions in the rule were actually directly in conflict with legislative intent. And so because of that, and because of other advocacy, we have, successfully secured an extension of the 2014 Farm Bill at least until September 30th of 2021. And that was passed through a continuing resolution through the spending bills. And that was done on October 31st. Now, that extension was granted because so many folks spoke up about this. I was speaking up for a long time with Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley. A lot of other national organizations were speaking up. We saw the Small Business Administration speak up. We saw a letter from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. We saw a letter come from Colorado Senator Cory Gardner. And so there was a lot of push to secure this extension. And a lot of it came because at one point this summer, there was actually 25 states out of the 49 that had elected to remain under the 2014 Farm Bill. So more states wanted to stay under their pilot program than transition to the 2018 commercial program. But what I have been advocating for the whole time was an extension until January of 2022, not until September, because we don't want our farmers to be subjected to a regulatory transition in the middle of harvest.
Mid-season,
it just
right?
doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so that was another problem with the original transition date of October 31st. And so what's been proposed right now and approved the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture is a full extension until January of 2022.
Okay. And
that will likely be included in the upcoming omnibus appropriations bill that needs to pass by now, December 18th.
Okay. So some states, my own state included, moved to the new program like pretty quickly. Like Pennsylvania was right on board with the new rules. Do you think that sets up like an unlevel or unfair playing field between the states that remained on the 2014 rules and some of the states that moved to the 2018 rules?
I don't think it's unfair. I would say, other than the tribal governments, for them, I would say maybe it wasn't fair for them because they never had the option to operate under a 2014 Farm Bill. Every state theoretically had the option, to set up a pilot program or to transition directly under the 2018 Farm Bill. Now, some of the state legislators and their actual legislation required that they move directly under the 2018 Farm Bill, which is what happened, for example, in Texas. But otherwise, no. And I'm glad that you brought this up because I did a webinar with the director of the Montana Department of Agriculture, Ben Thomas, and the assistant commissioner of the Texas Department of Agriculture, and also the cannabis policy coordinator at the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And we talked about this exact issue. And Texas immediately transitioned to 2018. Montana and Oregon remained under 2014, but Montana had already had their state plan approved. And, the position from Texas was that they felt that they were actually at an advantage from going under the 2018 Farm Bill because they had been operating under the 2018 Farm Bill and the interim final rules for at least a year, if not longer, before the other states transitioned. And so I thought that was a very unique perspective, whereas, in Oregon, we've been actively advocating to stay under the 2014 Farm Bill to continue to protect the program that we've built over all of these years and the protections that we've achieved. And, in Montana, they have done some really amazing things with their program. And so to hear the different perspectives from the regulators on what their position is versus what folks within the industry are feeling, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. I've heard from some Pennsylvania farmers who sort of lament that we moved so quickly to the 2018 rules here, and like, can't we just go back? Is there any pathway for a state that's been approved to lift that and go back to the old rules?
Given the extension, yes. If a state had a pilot program and wanted to operate under that pilot program, they still could, given that we are still having that authority. Now, that means they would have to repeal or pull back the state plan that they had. Now, I don't know of any that have had a plan actually approved and implemented that have pulled it back, but I know several of the states, including Oregon and Montana, that did pull their plans back after the additional extension of the 2014 Farm Bill.
Okay. So apart from the campaign to get THC raised a bit, what else are you working on? What else do you advocate for?
So the campaign that you're talking about is called the Crossroads campaign, and that campaign, as you mentioned, was specifically focused on trying to amend the USDA interim final rules before they become final, which is right around the corner, actually, and to increase or to just really redefine hemp to have a concentration threshold at 1% so that it's science-based and evidence-based. The other campaign that Agricultural Hemp Solutions is working on is called the Work in Progress campaign, and that campaign is specifically focused on creating a pathway for what we call intermediary or work in progress hemp that is above the 0.3% level in the intermediate phase, but would be going down to the lawful compliance threshold by the time it became a product.
Right.
Because right now there's a lot of issues with how is these concentrates, extracts, derivatives being transferred between manufacturers. There really isn't a pathway for the transfer of these materials in interstate commerce, given the federal threshold. And so we are working to create a pathway for that.
Do you think we'll ever see a world where the DEA isn't involved in the hemp program?
Well, the DEA shouldn't be involved in the hemp program right now. A major piece of the 2018 Farm Bill was removing hemp from the Controlled Substances Act definition of marijuana. And also we removed THC in hemp from the definition of tetrahydrocannabinols. And that should have taken the DEA out of hemp. The issue is that because marijuana is still scheduled, and theoretically anything above 0.3% THC would be considered marijuana, that's how DEA has gotten involved. However, when you look at the interim final rules, we do see a lot of DEA oversight into a lot of different areas that it shouldn't be, in our testing, in our destruction, etc.
So how soon can we expect 1% THC limit in the hemp industry?
If only we had a crystal ball. Well, there is a lot of push nationally for the move to a 1% threshold. And this can come in a few different ways. So to have a full fix so that our compliance threshold is based on 1%, we do need to have a legislative fix and have that definition amended by Congress. However, also in the interim final rules, the USDA came up with a negligence threshold at 0.5%. And so which is again, totally arbitrary number, is that until we can get legislation passed, a request has been made to USDA to increase that negligence threshold to 1%. And that request has been made not only by industry, it's been made by Senator Wyden and Senator McConnell, it's been made by the American Farm Bureau Federation, it's been made by NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. And so there is a lot of push not only to amend that negligence threshold, but also to fix the definition and change our compliance threshold up to the 1%.
Good. That sounds optimistic.
I'm optimistic.
Yeah, good. Me too. What else should we talk about? Like, what are your other sort of concerns? Maybe not just with legislation, but just the industry in general?
I would say what's a key piece to all of this is farmers first, right? If we don't protect our farmers and secure a solid pathway for them, then we don't have a crop to enter into the supply chain. We don't have a value chain. And so while there are a lot of issues that we're dealing with processing, and with end products, with FDA, is that we have to be very cognizant about what is happening in the field for the farmers, because that's going to be dependent or determinative of what happens down the supply chain. And so, my efforts have always been very focused on the farmers and making sure that we're creating frameworks that really work for them and allow them to thrive, but also allow them to be able to experiment in their own fields, use different type of cultivation methods, cultivate different varieties, see what really is working for them. And that's what's been so great about the pilot programs. And, one thing I want to mention on these lines is, the Montana program set up a system for a category system for their varieties. And if you're a category A variety, they only test and sample about 10% of those crops. Category B variety, they only test and sample about 20% of the crops. Category C, they'll test all of the crops. And so if we're trying to think about regulations that make sense for the farmers, it's not only about the 1%. The 1% is really, the key piece to opening up the markets and to stop our farmers from having, complete uncertainty on if their crops are going to make it, if they're going to be able to harvest, or what, if they're going to face any penalties. But all these other regulations that have been put in play are also having a major impact. And while 1% will alleviate a lot of the issues that relate to these other concerns, is that there are still other concerns out there. And so when the interim final rules were published, there were all of these new restrictions and requirements that were put in that were not required under the 2014 pilot program. Yes, states may have put in place how many days they would like sampling to be conducted within harvest, but that was never a requirement under the 2018 Farm Bill. And so it's little nuances like that, or requiring that every single lot of every different variety is tested, right? There are much more reasonable and practical ways to go about this that aren't so burdensome for our regulators or so cost prohibitive for our farmers, right? If our farmers are growing a known grain variety that has been grown for decades around the world, why are we requiring sampling and testing? That doesn't make sense. If we have fiber varieties that we know are true fiber varieties, why aren't we creating exemptions for those fiber farmers? And another thing I'll note is that fiber, there are some known fiber varieties that actually test above 1%. And so even if we get to this 1%, some of those varieties will still not theoretically be or technically be lawful hemp crops, right? But we know that they're fiber varieties. And so when we talked earlier about long-term full cannabis legalization, we'll be able to utilize these other types of varieties that have been grown around the world and that we know can, produce these great aspects of whatever that particular variety has without this fear, right? And so while it's important that we're all inclusive and that, yes, anything below 0.3, no matter what type of production, or if we can get to 1%, no matter what type of production is lawful, that we should really also still be thinking about, what is the end product? Are we making a true food of protein and seed oil? Are we making true industrial applications out of the fiber, whether it's, hempcrete or paper or textiles or batteries or what have you? And so we really should just be cognizant about that and not just have blanket regulation that is burdensome because of certain aspects of fear rather than true risk-based regulation.
I've been impressed with hemp's ability to bring, people of different political parties together. It's like this perfect bipartisan or nonpartisan thing. Do you think a change in administration in the White House will affect sort of the hemp landscape?
I think what's really going to be determinative is what happens in the Senate. Senator McConnell has been a huge champion for hemp, not only in Kentucky, but nationally. And, as I mentioned, Senator Wyden had been the chief sponsor of the previous hemp farming acts, the previous 4 that had been introduced. And, Senator Wyden had been working on the legislation, and, we were collaborating with Senator McConnell's office, and Senator McConnell, took the lead and said he would be the chief sponsor, and he used his position as Senate Majority Leader to move the ball forward, and his role on the Senate Agriculture Committee to ensure that the language was included in the 2018 Farm Bill. And so, right off the bat, we've already had incredible bipartisan support. And, because of Senator McConnell's position and leadership, we were able to get everything through the finish line. But, even if the Senate turns over and it's no longer a Republican Senate and we get a Democratic Senate, then we still have Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who would then become Senate Majority Leader. And he's also been an outward advocate. He wrote a letter to USDA this past summer. And so I think things will continue to move forward. And we've been very fortunate that we have had this support. And I think a lot of that comes because it is agriculture. And we are talking about farmers, but we've also are talking about creating jobs and incredible economic opportunity.
Yeah, so much economic opportunity. Yeah. So how can people support your campaigns? Like, is there a website? Is there an email address? Like, how can people get involved?
So you can learn more about our campaigns at agriculturalhempsolutions.com. You can call us at 888-388-HEMP. Feel free to email me directly, Courtney at Agricultural Hemp Solutions, or my campaign manager at campaigns at Agricultural Hemp Solutions. And, we're looking for folks to provide both financial support and also just to continue to carry the message to their own regulators. One of our campaign supporters said to me when I was out visiting his field during harvest and his farm, he said to me, if we don't win, everyone loses. And I couldn't have said it better myself. It's so true. It's not only the hemp industry that loses. It's the population. It's our planet. It's everyone that loses. We have this incredible opportunity, not only with the plant, but with this exact moment in time. No other time can I imagine that we have had active and open rulemakings, not only with so many of our state departments of agriculture in our programs, with the USDA, with DEA, and we have upcoming congressional sessions about to open. And some of these congressional sessions are opening in states that only meet every 2 years. And so this really is a very, very unique time. And, yes, the Farm Bill was passed 2 years ago, but we are still in our rulemaking phase. And this is the critical piece. The big hurdle is always, can we pass the legislation and get it signed into law? But that's when we really have our next opportunity, is working with our agencies and make sure it's implemented not only consistent with congressional and legislative intent, but in a manner that actually supports our industry. And so I encourage all of you to please reach out. This really is a time for our national community to come together, not only because of what's happening in the world, but because we have this very special moment to make a huge impact on how our regulatory framework is set up, and therefore how our entire industry is going to operate and be regulated from here on out.
Now is the time. So in the beginning of the interview, we talked a little bit sort of about your backstory and how you got into the hemp space. But why is hemp important to you?
Hemp's important to me because I think it can change the world. I know that it can. When I read Jack's book when I was a senior in college, I couldn't believe what I was reading. I mentioned I grew up in the DARE program, and I was told how awful this plant was and all the horrible things that it could do. And then I'm reading this book and learning about the history of this plant, and that it can clean up toxins out of our soil, that it could be making our clothing, giving us food. I just couldn't believe it. And I just kept researching and verifying everything that I was reading and learning more and meeting new people who were also drawn to this plant. I think about all the products that I even have and that I use on a daily basis, from hemp soaps to, towels and sheets and paper, and, my car is made out of hemp. It's mind-boggling to me that a plant that can do so many amazing things and make so many products that we use in our daily lives was illegal because of confusion and because of fear. And so I think that we are very fortunate to be living when we're living, and that we've been able to be so influential in changing policy and really demonstrating the power of individuals speaking up and, engaging with their regulators and their agencies, but also that we're at the beginning of this time where hopefully people are becoming a lot more cognizant about our impact on the earth and how we can, live more synergistically with each other and with the planet, and that we have a plant that can do so many amazing things, and that we have people that are interested in investing in this and developing the infrastructure and doing the research and development so that we can get to these products.
Courtney Moran, it is an honor and a pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me, Eric. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, that pretty much does it for today's show. Thank you for listening. I will have links and contact information for Courtney Moran and Agricultural Hemp Solutions, as well as a PDF about the Crossroads campaign. Everything will be on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com. My name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online. Get yourself a subscription. Also, you can follow this podcast on Instagram at LF Podcast Hemp. So until next time, I will see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
Episode 113 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2020 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, which is part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.